Princess Charlotte is called richer than her brother because economists track her impact on fashion sales. And that market is bigger than the one built around boys' clothing. Prince George will one day own the actual money, the land, the estate, the income that comes with being king. That's the whole tension of this story. One royal child moves billions of pounds through stores she's never set foot in. The other one is going to inherit a 700-year-old fortune. That's taxable and sitting in his name the day his father takes the throne. As of this year, Charlotte is 11, George is 13, and the gap between what she supposedly generates and what he's actually set to own has never been wider or more misunderstood. Let's start with the number that gets thrown around every single year. The one that makes Charlotte sound like the wealthiest kid on the planet. Princess Charlotte was barely walking when the number first showed up. She was 1 year old when analysts at Brand Finance calculated her worth to the UK economy at £3.2 billion, roughly $4.5 billion. Her brother, Prince George, who is second in line to the throne, was pegged at £2.4 billion, or about $3.2 billion by the same firm. A toddler outranking the future king. That's the hook. That's the thing that gets repeated in headline after headline every single year since. Here's how she got that number. The gap wasn't about anything Charlotte did. It came down to the fact that the boys' fashion market is simply smaller than the girls' and women's market. Brand Finance wasn't measuring cash in a trust fund. They were measuring something closer to advertising value. How much retail activity gets generated when a toddler wears a certain cardigan in public. And it moved fast. The day William and Kate walked out of the hospital with their newborn daughter, wrapped in a cream shawl, a company called G.H. Hurt & Sons watched their website traffic explode. The founder's great-granddaughter told WWD the volume wasn't even the real problem. The challenge was fulfilling that many individual shawl orders within a few weeks. One shawl, one photo, a backlog of orders across an entire company. That's the mechanism people mean when they say the Charlotte effect. It isn't a bank balance, it's a chain reaction. Baby wears something, something sells out. Repeat. And because girls' clothing, accessories, hair bows, and eventually beauty products cover so much more shelf space than boys' clothing ever will, her endorsement effect was expected to be felt across a much broader range of products and brands than George's, giving her far more scope for turning her image into sales. By the time she turned 10, the figure had grown. Royal commentator Sharon Carpenter told Us Weekly that Charlotte's influence, nicknamed the Charlotte Effect, helps drive sales, and estimated she'd be worth somewhere between £3 and £4 billion to the UK economy over her lifetime. More than her brother George, who will one day be king. Notice the wording there, not worth £3 billion, worth that much to the economy. Two very different things, and we're going to come back to exactly why that distinction matters, because it's the whole story. Other outlets have run their own versions of the same math since one estimate placed her value at an estimated £3 billion, around $3.8 billion, compared to George's £2.4 billion, or roughly $3 billion. And the most recent modeling from earlier this year put her valuation somewhere between 3.6 and 3.9 billion pounds, translating to roughly 4.4 to 5 billion dollars. The numbers shift depending on who's crunching them and when, but the ranking never flips. Charlotte on top, George behind her, every single time anyone runs the exercise. So why does this keep happening 10 years and counting? Why does a girl who's never held a job, never signed an endorsement deal, never appeared in an ad, keep beating her older brother in these rankings? The answer starts with someone who isn't even Charlotte, her mother. Because before there was a Charlotte effect, there was a Kate effect. And to understand why one royal child's wardrobe can move markets while another's barely registers, you have to understand what Kate Middleton built first, and what she accidentally handed down to her daughter the moment Charlotte was born. That's where this story actually starts making sense. Not with billion-pound estimates, but with a specific market, a specific set of habits, and a princess who was drafted into an economy she didn't choose. Before Charlotte ever wore a cardigan that sold out in an afternoon, her mother had already proven the concept could work at scale. Kate's influence on sales for the British fashion industry has been enormous, boosting British brands by upwards of £1 billion annually. Brand Finance went so far as to call her the most powerful royal fashion influencer, reporting that pieces she wears can raise desirability among American shoppers by nearly 40%. That's not a metaphor, that's measured. A dress spikes in searches the hour she's photographed. A brand gets flooded with traffic it never budgeted for. Retailers learned to expect it, and some started designing collections around the possibility that she might wear one piece and change their entire quarter. Now, here's the part that explains everything that happened to her daughter. Analysts describe this pattern as something Charlotte effectively inherited from her mother. Whenever Kate is photographed in a particular outfit or accessory, the product tends to sell within hours, a pattern that has repeated so often it's been documented by fashion analysts and stores again and again. Charlotte didn't build this mechanism. She was born directly into it. The cameras were already trained on the family. The retailers were already primed to react. All Charlotte had to do was exist in front of a lens wearing something identifiable, and the same machinery that moved for her mother started moving for her. That's a completely different starting position than the one George was born into. Prince George wasn't ignored by that machinery. In the earliest comparisons, boys' fashion is just not as big an industry as girls' and women's. And Charlotte's impact was expected to touch far more categories than George's. From hair and beauty products to accessories he'd never wear. He got his own bump in sales the moment he was born. It just had a lower ceiling because there simply isn't as much shelf space in a department store for boys under 10 as there is for girls of the same age. This is worth sitting with for a second because it's easy to read richer and assume something went wrong for George or that he was somehow snubbed. He wasn't. The market he was born into is just physically smaller. Boys' fashion, boys' accessories, boys' hair products. None of it comes close to matching the retail footprint of the equivalent girls' categories. Add adult women's wear as the long-term trajectory, because eventually a princess grows into buying power that ripples into beauty, jewelry, and bridal markets the way her mother's did. And you can see why the projected lifetime number for Charlotte kept climbing. Every time someone recalculated it, while George's number stayed comparatively flat. There's also a subtler mechanism at play, one that shows up in almost every fashion industry breakdown of the royal family: repeatability. Adult women and increasingly older girls don't just buy one item and stop. They follow a look, a brand, a style across seasons. That's the entire business model of high street fashion retail, chasing repeat purchases from the same shopper. Menswear and boyswear, especially at the age George and his peers are at, just doesn't generate that same cycle of anticipation. A boy's blazer doesn't get restyled into 6 variations the way a girl's cardigan does. So now, with Charlotte in her early teens and George not far behind her, the pattern is fully locked in. Every public appearance, every school-run photo, every birthday portrait gets run through the same filter. What is she wearing? Who makes it? How fast will it disappear from shelves? And crucially, this has nothing to do with anything she was set to inherit from the family, and everything to do with what she was projected to generate for other people's businesses. That distinction is the hinge this whole story turns on. Because while Charlotte was busy accidentally driving sales for children's brands she'd never met the founders of, George was quietly sitting in a completely different lane, one that had nothing to do with retail clicks or sellouts, and everything to do with land title and a 700-year-old legal charter that's been waiting for him since before he could talk. To understand what separates economic impact from actual inherited wealth, we need to look at exactly how these Charlotte effect numbers get built in the first place. Because once you see the machinery behind them, the comparison to George's future stops looking like a competition at all. Let's get specific about how firms like Brand Finance actually arrive at these figures, because the mechanics matter more than the headline. The starting point isn't a bank statement, it's a projection, an attempt to estimate the total retail activity a royal's public image will generate, across categories like clothing, accessories, toys, and eventually beauty, spread out over an entire lifetime. The most recent estimate placed Charlotte's projected value between 3.6 and 3.9 billion pounds, translating to somewhere between roughly 4.4 and $5 billion, but explicitly framed that figure as not an amount of money she holds in her hand, but rather an indication of the economic capacities that come with her image in society. That sentence is doing a lot of work. It's the clearest admission, buried inside a piece praising her wealth, that the number was never describing personal assets at all. Think about how that number actually gets constructed. Analysts track a sample of past sellouts, the cream shawl, a pair of Mary Janes, a specific cardigan, and calculate the revenue those triggered across the brands involved. Then they extrapolate that pattern across a lifetime, factoring in the assumption that as a royal ages, she'll be photographed more often, in more contexts, wearing more categories of product, from school uniforms to eventually adult fashion and bridal wear if she ever marries. Stack all of that projected retail activity together across decades, and you get a headline figure in the billions. It's a forecast of economic activity generated by her image, not a valuation of anything she owns. Compare that to how George's smaller figure in these same reports gets built. The same exercise runs for him. Sellouts of little boys' blazers, Wellington boots, the occasional toy tied to a public appearance. But the category is narrower, so the projected lifetime total comes out lower every single time the exercise gets repeated. It's not that fewer people are watching George, it's that there are fewer things retailers can sell off the back of watching him. And this effect compounds the older these two get. As Charlotte moves through her teens and eventually into adulthood, the categories multiply. Clothing, yes, but also hairstyling products, jewelry, and eventually the entire beauty industry that the Kate effect proved could move at 9-figure speed. One fashion outlet noted plainly that as Charlotte grows from a preteen into a teenager and then into her 20s, the Charlotte effect will only intensify because the retail categories available to a young woman in the public eye keep expanding in a way boyswear and menswear simply don't. It's worth being honest about how volatile these numbers actually are. Different firms, different years, and different methodologies have produced wildly different headline totals for the exact same person, sometimes citing figures around $3.8 billion, other times north of $5 billion, all describing the same girl. That's not because her situation changed dramatically year to year. It's because economic impact is an estimate built on assumptions about future retail behavior, and estimates move depending on who's building them and what they're choosing to project forward. None of this makes the underlying phenomenon fake. The sellouts happen, the traffic spikes happen. G.H. Hurt really did get flooded with orders over a single shawl. Retailers really do plan collections around the possibility of a royal child wearing one of their pieces. The Charlotte effect, as a retail phenomenon, is about as well documented as royal fashion coverage gets. But economic impact to the UK retail sector and personal net worth are not interchangeable phrases, even though headline writers have spent a decade treating them as if they were. And that gap is exactly where George's side of this story becomes impossible to ignore, because unlike his sister's number, his future inheritance isn't a projection built on shopping habits. It's already written into a royal charter, sitting there, waiting for a specific date that nobody controls. Here's where the story flips, because while analysts have spent a decade projecting Charlotte's retail influence into the billions, George's actual future wealth isn't a projection at all. It's a legal mechanism that's been running unbroken since the 1300s. The Duchy of Cornwall was established in 1337 by Edward III, specifically to provide independence to the monarch's son and heir. And a charter from that creation rules that each future Duke of Cornwall and owner of the estate will be the eldest surviving son of the monarch. Not a title in the ceremonial sense, an actual estate with actual revenue that passes automatically the moment the line of succession shifts. When Charles became king, William inherited it. The estate was valued at more than £1 billion, around $1.2 billion at the time William took it over, and current estimates put its value even higher, generating tens of millions of dollars in annual income for whoever holds the title. That income isn't hypothetical either. William reportedly earned more than £23 million, nearly $30 million, in a single recent year from the rents, investments, and surplus profits generated by the duchy's holdings. And the estate itself is enormous. It stretches across 23 counties in England and Wales and currently includes the Oval Cricket Ground, along with roughly 67,000 acres of Dartmoor, a collection that makes William the largest private landowner in Britain right now. When the throne eventually passes to him and then to George, that entire portfolio transfers with it, not as a bonus, not as a gesture, but because the estate is reserved exclusively for the monarch's eldest surviving son and heir, under that same 14th century charter, providing financial independence to whoever is next in line for the crown. This is the part that separates George's situation from anything projected about his sister. Nobody is estimating what George's future retail impact might generate in hypothetical sales 20 years from now. Nobody needs to model his numbers off a spreadsheet of past sellouts. The duchy's land, buildings, farms, and rental income already exist, already generate tens of millions annually, and are already legally earmarked to transfer to George the moment his father takes the throne. It isn't a forecast, it's a queue with George's name already at the front of it. William has said publicly that he doesn't want George to think of it purely as a financial machine either. Speaking to The Telegraph, William described wanting the duchy to be more than a traditional landowning operation, saying, "We're not the traditional landowner, we want to be more than that," framing his stewardship of the estate as a form of philanthropy rather than pure revenue extraction. That's a meaningful shift in tone from how previous Dukes of Cornwall have talked about the role. But it doesn't change the underlying fact that whoever holds the title controls a real estate portfolio worth well over $1 billion, with the legal right to spend its surplus. However, the sitting Duke sees fit. There's a reason royal watchers have started paying closer attention to how transparent the family is being about all of this. Buckingham Palace has gradually published increasingly detailed annual financial reports since the Sovereign Grant replaced the Civil List in 2012, breaking down spending on official duties, travel, and palace maintenance, and has even produced an official guide explaining the difference between public funding, private wealth, the Crown Estate, and the duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall. That transparency exists precisely because the public keeps asking the same question this video is asking: what's real money and what's just influence? And that question has a very clean answer once you put George's inheritance next to his sister's headline number. Charlotte's billions are a forecast of what other companies might earn off her image. George's inheritance is an estate that already exists, already produces income, and already has his name attached to it by law decades before he'll ever sit on a throne. So if the numbers say Charlotte is richer and the charter says George is the one who actually owns something, which one of these is telling the truth about wealth? That's the question we settle now. So let's put both halves of this story side by side, because that's what settles it. Charlotte's headline number, whether it's quoted at £3 billion, $4 billion, or the higher estimates that have crept toward $5 billion in recent projections, measures something specific: the retail activity her public image is projected to generate for other people's businesses across her lifetime. That figure moves depending on which firm calculates it and what assumptions they plug in, because it was never meant to describe a bank balance. It's an economic impact score, not a fortune. The clearest version of that came straight from the source material itself. The estimate wasn't an amount of money she holds in her hand, but rather an indication of economic capacities that come with her image in society. George's future, on the other hand, isn't a projection. It's a legal transfer that's already scheduled. The Duchy of Cornwall, valued today north of $1 billion, spread across dozens of counties, generating tens of millions in annual income, moves to George automatically the moment his father becomes king, under a charter that's been enforced since the 14th century without interruption. No analyst has to model that. No sellout has to happen. It's already written down. That's the actual answer to the question this video opened with. Charlotte is described as richer because she operates in a bigger market. Girls and women's fashion dwarfs boys' wear in retail terms, and every prediction about her future only grows that gap. As she ages into categories like beauty and adult fashion that George will never touch in the same way. But market size isn't the same thing as ownership. Charlotte isn't projected to personally receive a check for 4 or 5 billion pounds. She's projected to be the reason other companies collectively earn that much. George, by contrast, is going to personally hold title to real land, real buildings, and a real income stream the day the crown passes down the family line. There's something almost poetic in how the two paths split. Charlotte was born into a market that reacts instantly and visibly. A shawl sells out in days. A cardigan disappears from shelves, and the whole world watches it happen in real time on social media and in retail traffic reports. George was born into a mechanism that moves invisibly and slowly. A centuries-old charter, a landholding that quietly compounds value over decades, an income stream that shows up in financial disclosures rather than sell-out headlines. One path is loud and immediate, the other is patient and steady. Neither one is really about the child at the center of it. Charlotte didn't choose to inherit her mother's effect on retail, any more than George chose to be born the eldest son of the man who will eventually be king. Both of them were simply born into machinery that had already been running long before they existed. One built by a decade of tabloid fashion coverage, the other built by Edward III 7 centuries ago. It's also worth remembering that these two things aren't actually in competition, no matter how many headlines frame them that way. George getting the duchy doesn't reduce Charlotte's retail influence, and Charlotte's fashion impact doesn't take a single pound away from what George stands to inherit. They're two completely different categories of value that happen to be easy to compare because they both get expressed in billions. One is a forecast about consumer behavior. The other is a real estate transfer written into royal law. Stack them next to each other, and you get a headline. Look closer, and you get two entirely separate stories about two kids who were never actually competing with each other in the first place. So the next time that number gets repeated, Charlotte richer than George, a girl outranking a future king, you'll know exactly what's being measured and exactly what isn't. One number tells you how much stuff might sell because of her. The other tells you what he's actually going to own. And when the crown eventually passes, only one of these two kids is going to be holding a deed. Master list of references. Fashionista. The Princess Charlotte effect is over $1 billion stronger than the Prince George effect. Mike Gravel. How much is Princess Charlotte worth? Marie Claire. Princess Charlotte is wealthier than both Prince George and Prince Louis, new study reports. The list. Princess Charlotte's glamorous style transformation. Time. Princess Charlotte's fashion impact already in the billions. Matlaba News. Princess Charlotte net worth and her global influence. Yahoo US Weekly. Princess Charlotte will eventually be worth 4 billion pounds, thanks to the Charlotte effect. Yahoo Us Weekly. Princess Charlotte will one day be worth billions of pounds to the UK economy. AOL. The Princess Charlotte effect. The young royal is worth $4.5 billion. Tyla. Key titles. Wealth and residences. Prince George will inherit as king. Royal Family News, Prince George's inheritance, a look at the $1.2 billion estate. Hello Magazine, Prince George is set to inherit £1.2 billion property portfolio. Celebrity net worth, Prince George net worth. GB News, Prince William outlines his plans for Prince George's inheritance. Yahoo She Knows, Prince George will inherit not only a crown, but a renowned English party town. Fortune, Prince William inherits Duchy of Cornwall estate from King Charles.